Welcome, everyone. Shalom Aleichem. Today we're back to our regular Torah reading, and we'll talk about the question, why did they die? Who am I referring to?
Ah, okay.
Sons of Aaron.
Yes,
Yeah.
the two sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu. That's the big question of our parsha. What happened? Why did this tragedy happen? What did they do wrong? So let's um, figure out the background first, or let's talk about the background of this tragic event. So I'll play a video, and that will give us the background. I'll play a music video in just a few seconds, and you'll see why it's connected. So I'll share the sound, and here it is. Okay, so as you see here, it's called the Consecration of the House Overture. Beethoven wrote it inaugurating for the inauguration of a new theater or musical hall. And the reason I brought it is because that's what's happening in our parsha. It's not a consecration of a theater, but a consecration of what?
Mishkan.
Yeah, of the Mishkan. And so that's what's happening. That we just ended the 7 days of Miluim. By the way, the word Miluim in modern Hebrew, it's used for the reserve duty in the army, as Aaron knows so well. But in the Torah, and there's a theory that they purposely took these um, Torah words, which have a religious meaning, and secularize them. And it's part of a larger pattern. But whatever the case, these 7 days where Moses was the high priest, he was slaughtering animals, he was sprinkling the blood, and he was following he was basically doing all the job that from now, on the eighth day, Aaron and his sons will be doing it. And that's important because this is the first day that they will actually be doing these things, the service in the tabernacle. And that might play a role in understanding how the tragedy happened. So it's a celebratory day. There were not fireworks, but there were um, um, big mass events with a whole congregation participating, uh, as we'll see in a second. Um, so the they're bringing sacrifices, and God sends out a fire that consumes the sacrifices, showing that God approves of all that had transpired, and that God is now dwelling in the midst of Israel, and there's a feeling of joy, and this is a verse just before the episode of Nadav and Avihu, and the verse reads, "When all the people saw this, they shouted and flung themselves on their faces." And that's verse 24. And then the next verse is verse 1 of chapter 10, and we have a volunteer to read it.
Okay, now Aaron's sons, Nadav and Abihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it. And they offered before God alien fire that he did not command them. And fire came forth from God and consumed them. Thus they died before the presence of God. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what God meant by saying, 'Through those near to me, I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people.'" And Aaron was silent.
So what questions arise when we read this paragraph?
Well, did the punishment fit the crime?
Ah, okay,
First thing.
right. And why was it a crime? I mean, it's hinting, it's saying do not command that, but is there a specific violation? Is there a
Well,
specific?
they crashed the party, so to speak.
Yeah,
They're not invited.
not invited. And what does it mean exactly? Ate in fire. So many things are unexplained. The Torah doesn't explain what. Let's see in the Hebrew, right? The Torah doesn't say what is this esh zara, and what does it mean asher lo tziva otam? What exactly did they do wrong? What's the in court, when we take people to court and charge them, we say what we refer to a specific offense. Even in religious courts, even throughout the Torah, they violated this precept, they violated that mitzvah, but it's not clear. It doesn't say what, it's not referring us back to some particular mitzvah related to the service in the tabernacle that they violated. It's just saying, Esh zara asher lo tziva otam. Why did they do it? Also, we don't hear why. What was their motivation? And um, why were they consumed by a fire? Exactly, like you say, Alan, the punishment. Why this terrible punishment? Seems a little out of proportion. If you can't, if it had said they worshipped foreign gods, okay, but it didn't. They didn't worship foreign gods. They're worshiping God. It says "Vayakribu lifnei Adonai," right? They're serving Adonai, maybe in a way that um, is not what God had said. But why such a terrible punishment?
Well, the
So
Midrashim, I think, say that they were drunk.
oh,
And
so
and
okay, so
drunkenness.
and they are based on texts and a textual analysis. So we'll see two. Rashi brings two midrashim, and apparently he's not. And what you're referring to, Natalie, is Rabbi Ishmael. They died because they had entered the sanctuary after having drunk wine. But then he also brings the first one that Aaron's sons died only because they rendered halachic decisions in the presence of Moses, their teacher, maybe trying to usurp his power, his stature. And so that tells us Rashi is not completely satisfied with the serving drunk explanation. But why is that such a convincing explanation, the serving drunk? Because a few psukim later, the Torah itself gives us the following commandment. So now it's not a midrash. Now the Torah says, right? So that happened in verse 1 of chapter 10. And in verse 8, we read, and Adonai spoke to Aaron, saying, drink no wine or other intoxicant, you or your sons, when you enter the tent of meeting, that you may not die. This is the law for all time throughout the ages. So it seems too random if there is no connection between this prohibition and what happened to Nadav and Avihu. It almost defies logic that out of all the places in the Torah where you could bring us this prohibition, you put it right where these two sons of Aaron died from a mysterious reason that we're not sure of. So,
But this is an ex post facto law, right?
our commentators are troubled by it. How could you punish for something that they had not been warned before? Excellent question.
Good point.
And so let's see a commentator, how they address that. Uh, so before Bechor Shor. So ex post facto law. How can they? It's against principles of natural justice and God is always fair. And so the Rosh, or Benu Asher, so the 13th century, says En mukdam u'muchar b'Torah. They actually did receive it before. So even though it appears in verse 8 and they died in verse 1, it was really before verse 1. It was given before verse 1, except the editor of the Torah, he put it later to maybe dramatize the event, to maybe have wake us
Poor,
up, shake us a little bit.
Uh-oh, you just said something naughty. The editor of the
yeah,
Torah.
Yeah,
Whoa.
yeah, no, but
poor editing
yeah. Well, I mean, now we're talking about it. Maybe that's his goal. He wants us to be bothered by it and to talk about it. If it had been buried, right, among other, let's say, 10 other prohibitions and mitzvot related to the tabernacle, we wouldn't pay attention to it so much. Uh, okay, I'm not sure it's convincing, um, but that's one way that's the this is how the Rosh um, answers it. And maybe because it's not so convincing and it really seems so unjust if it was given after, especially when the words are "do not die." Um, right? The Torah says that you may not die. In other words, if you don't want this to happen again, so it almost seems like it did come after, but that's why we see so many other explanations from commentaries. And let's go through them. Midrashim and commentaries, uh, really, there's no shortage of all kinds of alternate explanations for what they did wrong. So, one, improper offering. This was not sanctioned by Adonai, or maybe even forbidden. So the Esh Zara, the foreign fire, they were not told, and you can't improvise. You can't improvise. It's all you have to follow protocol, and you can't, even if it's out of enthusiasm, even if your motives are good, you cannot do that. And the Netziv from Volozhin, who lived in the 19th century, and he was a misnagid. He was opposed to the Hasidim, who were, talked about dveikus, about cleaving to God and excitement, and not just singing and dancing, but even bending the rules a little bit in order to get more people in the fold. He was against that, and this is the explanation that he gives. So he's very subtly saying the Hasidim are going in the path of these two sons of Aaron, and that's not a good path to go by. We know where it ends. You've got to follow protocol. You've got to follow halacha. You can't be lenient and say, oh, the times of davening, it's okay. We can daven mincha after sunset, or we can. He was a very strict halachist and had uh, criticism of the Hasidim, and I think in between the lines, he's without mentioning them, this was they were very respectful, even though they had big arguments. He didn't say anything about them, but I think he's hinting that. Then there's another explanation. Number two, wrong clothing. So apparently, when they were taking out their bodies, the Torah says they were only covered in tunics. So maybe they weren't wearing the proper clothing. And again, you can't uh, do service in the tabernacle uh, while not following the protocol. And part of the protocol is to wear all the proper priestly garments. Then number three is that they were arrogant and that they thought that they could improvise a service because they have stature and they've just been anointed as priests. And they are not only priests, but they are the sons of the high priest. So maybe they were arrogant. Then we saw this was the number four is what Rashi brought, right? Rashi brought two opinions. He brought the wine drunk, and then he said, well, they were giving instructions in front of Moses and undermining his authority. And so God has to make sure that everybody knows that only whoever God appoints as leader can be a leader, and you can't undermine Moses and Aaron's authority. So that's number four. And still more, we have, interestingly, refused to marry. Why? Why does that come up? Because we're later in the census, we're told that they did not have sons. In Bamidbar, when their offense, when this tragic episode is briefly mentioned, one line, the Torah adds, Ubanim lo hayu lahem. They did not have sons, so that's a fact. But why would that be capital punishment? Why would that be a capital offense? That's very far-fetched. I'm not persuaded at all.
Well, it depends on the reason that they didn't have sons. I mean, in modern parlance, they could have had different interests, shall we say. which
Ah,
was prohibited.
yeah. But then the Torah doesn't shy away from saying about people who engaged in forbidden sexual activities. And I think if that were the case, they would say it. But maybe you're right. Maybe it is out of respect for them. Well, this is not the Torah. This is again the Midrash
Mhm.
commentaries who take the words of they did not have sons as a reason for their punishment, for that they did not marry. But yeah, it's possible what you say. Then we saw already the SUI, service under the influence. That was the drunk theory that is really prominent because the text does have that prohibition immediately after the tragedy. And then there's the idea that there is no transgression, and it's just that being so close to Adonai is necessitates their death. It's the natural consequences of being close to God, but that's again, God wants people to come close to God according to protocol. Again, what if there's no breach of protocol? Then why would just being close to God? I mean, God dwells in the sanctuary. That's the whole purpose of the sanctuary. That God dwells there, and the people who are permitted to be there are there, and they are permitted to be there because they are priests. So if it was like a Israel, right, a member of the other tribes, okay, then why is he in a place where he's not supposed to be? But they are supposed to be there. Okay, then I also today found that and today's Yom HaShoah, right, Memorial Holocaust Memorial Day. So we're going to honor one who wrote prolifically about the Shoah survivor. Who is this?
Wiesel.
Rizal. So apparently he also wrote an article about this, and you'll see how it fits his whole theme of writings. Elie Wiesel
Mm.
says that there's no reason,
Mm.
and that the Torah offers no explanation for their deaths because there's no comprehensible reason. Adonai's ways are not ours, and some things are beyond human comprehension. Do you hear the echoes of his other
Oh,
writings here?
absolutely. I mean, that really encapsulates his
Right,
writing.
right? Yeah, yeah. And so he wants to see also in this episode already, having witnessed and gone through what he had gone through. Uh, sometimes we don't have explanations. We just have to uh, as it were, throw in the towel and just accept the reality without trying to find meaning in it, to find reasons in it, which is an
That's
interesting.
it's a difficult concept.
Yeah.
It's when you look at the Shoah, you really can understand where somebody's coming from to say that. But on the other hand, if you if you adopt that, you can excuse a lot of human misbehavior.
Okay. So that's a good point. So was there any misbehavior here? I want to get to that a little bit later. Um, so for those who don't accept, right, all these other reasons except for the drunk, how would they explain the commandment to not drink before they enter the sanctuary? So
Okay,
Bechor
so
Shor
yeah,
commentary, he has an interesting way, a very creative way to say, yeah, it's not the reason they died, but the reason that the Torah now brings this prohibition is here. Maybe we'll have a volunteer to read it because it's very creative.
okay. Even though we usually give wine and alcohol to mourners, as it is said, give strong drink to the hapless, you and your sons, don't drink, because you are forbidden to do so when entering the tent of meeting, and this is punishable by death. It's totally ironic because we make Kiddush, we sanctify the wine, that's supposed to draw us closer to God. It's difficult to, balance these two things.
Yeah. I, so um, when 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 you it's also difficult that they would want to drink wine to assuage their grief. I don't know that never occurred to me. And maybe you guys can think about when you were mourning. I mean, did you have that desire? I don't remember, uh, you know, when mourning my father, alav shalom, or going to levayas, and after the levaya, if it's somebody who lived a long life, you have a little chayim to celebrate his life, to talk about it. But he says, okay, so this is his opinion that maybe back then in that era, when tragedy struck so hard, to lose two sons, the custom was to deal with it with alcohol. And so
Yeah.
God is warning that no, don't do it now, because you are supposed to continue working in the sanctuary, right? If you weren't supposed to work, then this would be what you would probably do now. And so don't drink wine or alcohol, since you still have to continue your work as a priest. In other
I
words,
mean, look, I'm sure we all know people who have become alcoholics who started drinking in view of some sort of personal, either tragedy or very, something bad that happened to them. And they do drink and then they get hooked.
yeah, right. And so it's kind of
So,
escapism. Yeah. And
yeah.
so I mean, he's talking about a phenomenon that that even occurs today, and people can become alcoholic, and so that's how he would explain it. In other words, the reason for their death has nothing to do with their being drunk. They were not drunk. It was one of all the other reasons, one of them that we saw. Probably he would say Esh Zara, the foreign fire. They did something they were not commanded. They broke protocol, and the reason we have this commandment of do not drink, this prohibition, is simply to prevent Aaron and the remaining two sons from starting to drink to deal with their grief. Okay.
So, I really still like the idea that they died because they drank. And the reason is that, I mean, you can look at it anthropologically, and that is that back then it was de rigueur if you were a pagan to drink. It was part of the culture. You would drink before you performed your so-called duties to the gods. You got drunk. And so this may have been a way of saying Israelites are not supposed to
Ah,
go into
right,
pagan practices.
right. And it connects to this being their first day on the
Yeah,
job.
yeah.
Right, right. So I like that. Yes. Now, in Acharei Mot, which we're going to read in 2 weeks
Mhm.
or 3 weeks, there, even though the subject is the high priest's duties on Yom Kippur, it opens with, that's the name of the parsha, after the death of the two Acharei Mot, Shnei Bnei Aaron, Bekovatam Lifnei Adonai Vayamutu, when they came near before the presence of Adonai and died. And then the next verse is, Adonai said to Moses, tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die, for I appear in the cloud over the cover. And so there it seems that their mistake was entering a forbidden area where they were not supposed to be. And right, because it even says after the death of Aaron. In other words, here is why they died, and now I'm telling you what not to do. And the JPS translation is even clearer that they see it that way. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron who died when they drew too close. They added the word, they added the too close to the presence of Adonai. So the Torah just says when they drew close, Bekovatam, and the JPS translation, because every translation is really also an interpretation. They seem to think that this was their sin. Not it's not just a description of an action that they took, but a reason for their death. Okay, but I want to go in a different direction. So we talked about this, ex post facto law, and I would like to suggest that we take a different theological approach. All the approaches that we've seen so far are basically saying, since there was a death, a premature death of two promising young adults, they must have done a sin. They must have done something wrong.
Mm.
However, what if we took a different theological approach and we said that maybe it's not connected to any sin at all? So it's a little bit like what Elie Wiesel said, but I want to go in a different direction. He said God's ways are not our ways, and there are certain things we don't understand. I want to say you're right about that there was no sin, but I can offer an explanation of why it happened. And we all have seen it in our life. It's what happens. Oh, and I want to set the background for it. In other places in the Torah, when God punishes people, God makes clear it's a punishment. So we have that with a blasphemer. It says, take out the blasphemer, let all who heard the curse pelt him with stones. Any man that insults his God, he shall bear his sin. With Korah, the earth doesn't just open up and swallow them. Of course, there's a long passage there where first Moses warns them, and he says, this is going to be your punishment. And then the Torah says this was their punishment. So it's very clear there that it's a punishment for their rebellion. Even punishments that are not, and that don't end with death, like Moses and Aaron, when they are punished that they cannot enter Israel, the Torah says, because you did not have trust in me. So God always appears in the story saying this is a punishment. In our story here, with the deaths of Nadav and Avihu, God is nowhere to be seen. God does not make any explanation. There's no explanation. So what I'm suggesting is that it was an accidental fire. And it would not be surprising because that's a place where there's always fire. There's the fire of sacrifices, and there's the fire of the incense offering. That's also fire. And so I really don't understand how commentaries throughout the ages, who know that whenever people do deal with fire, there could be accidents. I haven't found yet somebody who says this could simply be an accident, but the theological approach of all these commentaries is they must have done something wrong.
Well,
But we know that people.
combine the two things. If they had brought drink in, the alcohol is an accelerant. So yeah, it could have been a fire, an accident that went poof because of something that they actually did do.
Oh, excellent. So let's give the example of a person who gets in the car
Yeah.
and after drinking, we would never say God punished him. We just say, look, you drank and then you were a little bit, uh, doozy, and that's why you crashed into the wall and you killed yourself. So, right, we don't say it's a punishment, but
Right.
it's a direct result of, right. So we can combine the two. We can say there was no prohibition on drinking wine. So they didn't do an offense in the religious sense. But it's a fact, it's a reality that when people drink, their judgment is impaired, right? And now they're dealing with fire. They're dealing with fire. So it's very likely that they got too close. It accidentally caught their clothing. They put it near a wooden thing where anybody who was not impaired would know you don't put fire near wood, right? So whatever they did, it was what we call today negligence due to the fact that their judgment was impaired. And uh, to me, it's a little bit Elie Wiesel, but saying no, there is an explanation, and that's the lesson we should learn from here. To always be careful when dealing with fire or dealing with anything dangerous. And I think that's maybe the whole the main point of this story. Now, how would it fit with the Esh Zara, Asher Lo Tziva Otam? Well, what makes it Zara,
Strange
foreign,
fire. Yeah.
right, is that God commands us to be careful with everything that can end our life, that is dangerous to our lives, right? Pikuach nefesh. So when the Torah says Asher Lo Tziva Otam, it's talking about the broader issue of you are not commanded to be reckless. That's the meaning, right? You're not commanded to be reckless when dealing with fire or any dangerous substance. I command you to be careful when you deal with those things. How to be careful? That's safety. That's OSHA. That's safety regulations. I don't need to tell you that, right? And every generation we learn more and more because we learn from mistakes. We learn from tragedies. So the Torah couldn't even give us a full list of what we need to be careful of because it changes as we gain more knowledge. That's how I think we can explain those words, Esh Zara, Asher Lo Tziva Otam, a foreign fire. Now, and so that's,
I have a question. Did
yeah,
because I can't remember, did Aaron have additional sons besides,
yeah, he had two more,
and what were their names? Do you
and
remember?
Itamar uh, and the other one was Nadav, Avihu, Elazar and Itamar.
Okay, so those are the forebears then of the Aaronite priests.
Right,
Okay,
right,
thank you.
yeah. So to summarize, I think I understand why commentaries throughout the ages looked for something wrong that they did because it's a deep psychological need we have to make sense of terrible tragedies, right? We see that in, Elie Wiesel dealt with it by saying it's I can't make any sense of it. It's so horrible what I witnessed, what happened to the Shoah, that's sui generis. But regular accidents, regular tragedies, people lose sons, daughters, parents at young age, right? We want a reason. We want to hold on to something. There must be a reason. We want to make sense of it in the psychological meaning of it. Um, and that's what all these commentators are trying to do. So I understand where they're coming from, right? To bury two sons, Aaron, or for the two other brothers to bury their brothers, right? Terrible tragedy. And you want to say there must be a reason. But I think that when we look at what happens today and throughout generations, you know, there were fires of people lighting Shabbat candles that ended in tragedies, in fatal accidents, right?
Every
Every
year
year,
you
right?
hear it.
And Hanukkah candles, same thing, Hanukkah candles. So Chas v'Shalom, they weren't punished. No, these were righteous people, good citizens. It happened because we as a society are sometimes negligent, and people are sometimes negligent, and we don't pay attention to all the safety things that we need to pay attention to. And I think perhaps that is what happened here in our story. So what we can take from it is that especially when it's a religious setting, right? There's no guarantee that the regular rules of negligence won't apply, right? We have to be just as there was a guy in Israel who went to court. He was caught by police and not wearing a seatbelt, and he went to court and said, "I have a defense. I said tfilat haderech, so I don't need to wear a seatbelt." The judge laid it into him. I mean, Judge Mudrick, I'm trying to get a copy of the decision. If I get it, I'll share it
Oh,
next
that's
week.
funny.
He wrote a 5-page ruling, really, I mean, really laying into this person and bringing sources and saying, how dare you use religion or prayer to justify endangering your life? Not to mention, yeah, well, it was his life, because if he crashes, the fact that he doesn't have a seatbelt won't affect others in other cars. It will affect him, but still, so that's the kind of thing that we can't say that because there was a sanctuary or tabernacle that they are immune from the regular dangers of dealing with fire, right? And so,
So how would the story have changed, the theory about the fire, if Nadav and Avihu weren't the only two people who died? If the fire went out of the Mishkan and killed 1,000 Israelites who were hanging around, how would this story be looked at differently?
so that would be um, probably ascribed to punishing the entire community for a really bad sin that they did.
Mm,
I think. So that kind of brings it to the closer to the ego, to the right golden calf
yeah,
episode.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But and you can combine this explanation of negligence with some of the others, arrogance, right? I'm doing holy work. I don't need to be careful about safety regulations, right? It can be combined, like you said, Natalie, with the drunk. It's okay if I had a few drinks. I'm
yeah.
doing holy work. I'll be okay. You hear that all the time. People, it's just 5 minutes from the house, from the bar to my house. It's okay. I'll just drive 5 minutes. Um, trying to excuse really what's unexcusable, right? Because we
Yeah.
know that alcohol impairs your judgment. So I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. All right, so I think we'll stop here. Yeah.
Thank you.
All
Thank you,
right.
Shabbat.
Okay,
Take care.
take care.
Yes, bye-bye.